So hi again, everyone. Let's wait until about 4 past before starting, also to have Carsten with us.
Sounds good.
The one thing I'm missing in Meet Echo that, for example, Jitsi has is a simple thumb up button.
We'll be sure to tell the Meet Echo crew. Hi, Manisha.
Scrolling through the slides of ad hoc OSCORE, I now see where my impression came from that it has always been a concatenation and not a SIBO byte string, because it's depicted in the last slide in a way that doesn't imply that there is some SIBO wrapping. That explains my error, which I'm glad to have found, because I looked through the old documents and was like, right? It's
Yeah,
always
we did some archaeology, and yeah, it was never a change. It was like that all along.
good to know where my mind went.
Yeah, to be fair, it was also lazy convenience for my implementation, just relying on the library to parse something that was just a sequence. So as soon as Carsten is back on keyboard, we plan to start.
Yeah, you seem to have had an interesting discussion here while I was away.
Just to warm up. So now that you're back, I think we can start as usual at 4 past. So welcome everyone. This is an interim meeting of the core working group. I'm Marco Tiloca, my co-chairs are Carsten Bormann and Jaime Jimenez. And as usual, this is an official active meeting, so the note well applies. Get familiar with that. If you're not already, it's not only about IPR, it's also and especially about our code of conduct. So be nice and professional with each other. And the link to the minutes is in the chat, and Kristen will take notes. Thanks a lot for that, and I'll try to help you out. Any further help is welcome. And yeah, I slightly extended the agenda before the meeting, considering the developments in the last 90 minutes or so. So we'll have a status update on 2 core-conf documents, especially SEED, I believe. Then we go through core target attribute, and later on the profiling, IETF-CORE and OSCORE. The last 2 documents were in working group last call until yesterday. Any bashing on this agenda, anyone? If none, then we can get into CoreConf. It will be Karsten with a single slide set.
Yeah, thank you. So we will do this one slide last. And let's quickly talk about CoreConf. As you know, we have published Yang CBOR in 9254. We have CoreSID in ISG, and we have working group last call passed status on CoreCOMI. Finally, we also have working last call passed on Yang library, but this is really describing so much of the Yang ecosystem that we probably need to revisit this at the time when we actually get to this. So I'm going to talk about CoreSID and a little bit about CoreCOMI. So CoreSID, as you know, we still have Rob Wilton's Discuss outstanding, and we had a lot of discussions and quite a few edits. Yeah, it has turned out to be difficult to keep the feedback cycles short. So we're going to do a couple of open loop things right now. And I submitted -20 based on what the authors think is addressing Rob's concerns, but we haven't had feedback from him yet. And this is intended to cover all open items. So what were these open items? As always, you can always improve a document editorially. There were also some Yang clerical things that needed to be done, version numbers and things like that. But the main change is that we now have a per SID file status, which can be unpublished or published, and per SID item status that can be unstable, stable, or obsolete, where obsolete is the same thing as stable, just with kind of a deprecation mark on it. We also completed the move from Yang data to the structure Yang feature, which is a little bit of a problem because we no longer have a tool that we can use to validate our examples. And yes, this struck us right away. Turns out that the Yang JSON representation of UN64 in the IETF system.SID example was wrong. So we have fixed that as well. So that's the status. That's what in -20. And well, probably we should try to obtain feedback from Rob Wilton on this -20. But also, I think we need to discuss what are the appropriate next steps. Are we just going to wait for this discuss to be cleared and consider this done? Or are we going to look into a little bit more feedback from the working group about all the changes that have been made since essentially 2021, since mid-2021 when we finished -16 from the working group last call. So if there's any discussion of this from my co-chair, because I can play chair on this, please jump in.
Yeah, Marco here. I think a working group was called here would help, even it would be the third one, if I'm not wrong, on this document. Well, we have a meeting with Jaime tomorrow. I'd like to double check with him, but I think we can do that soon. Just to be sure, Carsten, do you want to give a few days to Rob in case he?
No, we can do this in parallel. We can do this
Yeah,
in parallel.
yeah. Okay. Okay, I plan to check with Jaime latest tomorrow, and then we can start this. Yeah.
Great.
And it should still give enough time to come back on this in Yokohama anyway.
So I have one more slide on this, which is maybe really more for your amusement, but while I was working on these things, I really was fed up with not having a way to validate them. So I actually wrote a sid.cddl. And while I was doing this, Laurent Toutain sent me an Excel sheet of all things with some SID allocations, and that got me thinking. And some of you may know that I have a draft out there for doing cddl for CSV files. So I just went ahead and defined a CSV version of a SID file. And you can see this, so the little parts of it on this slide. So this is so much easier to work with than the JSON file we have modeled in Yang, and which now has all these Yang things in it. Anyway, just as a little bit of a sneak view into the process that got this document at least partially validated. And of course, if people want me to review any SID files, I will convert them into this form to read them. Okay, but that was just amusement. So the next item is called COMI. So again, we can probably parallelize this a little bit. We wanted to make sure we have core SID under control, and we can work from the hypothesis that this is so, and now address core COMI. At IETF 115, we had discussions, which I haven't repeated on this slide here, about applying some simplifications based on implementation experience that we had there sitting at the table in the hackathon. Well, my plan would be to move forward with getting these changes actually into the document. And yeah, Marco, this is the place where you might want to jump in again.
Sure. Yeah, there was early discussion already, and we started to sync also with Francesca already. This is especially about handling a change of Shepherd and tweaking also the author list to meet the 5 people limit. But we have a tentative plan that we are starting to enforce.
Yeah, so the rough plan is that I actually do the finishing stuff for this document as well, which means that I can no longer be Shepherd, and we need a new Shepherd, and we have to modify the author list, as Marco said. Okay, that's all I had for CoreConf. So I think I'm going to the next item here, the target attribute item. That's interesting. Oh, okay. So we passed the working group last call on the document yesterday, and we had all the working group last call comments addressed, submitted -02 with those comments addressed. And the changes mostly were, I added an acknowledgements paragraph. This is probably the biggest change. But there were lots of editorial improvements in the working group last call comments. Thank you, everyone. That's why I had to set the acknowledgement section. One interesting addition is to point to the core parameters mailing list for potential discussions between registrants, the designated expert, and the wider community. So I think that's I think a good idea to have a place to involve the community in the curation of this registry. And I think it's a good idea to mention this here. I also removed the internet draft-based registrations. My plan was to ship this now, and get a decision to submit to ISG soon. Now Christian has come up with a few more items, and I think I have made a pull request that actually addresses this. So Christian, you want to say something about this?
No, I'll have to look at the pull request, but I think the mail discussion, or the resolution of the mail discussion sounds pretty straightforward.
Good. So my plan would be to fill in Christian's changes and generate a -03, and then we can submit that.
Looking at the mail now, there is one point where I'm slightly disagreeing. That is about some attributes that are used in a particular context only, having become being gone for all other uses. My rough take on how RT is working is that resource types can be mutually exclusive. So base, ETD, and endpoint and EP, as they're used in resource directory, wouldn't be gone like for all other users, but just for those that don't explicitly conflict with something being a resource directory. But registering things is all kind of is a good start, and how those conflicts would be resolved, I don't know whether people will actually want to go so far as to explicitly declare the conflicts to reuse particular names. Don't know whether that's realistic.
Yeah, one question I had in mind is, do these things ever change their flags? So do you have things in the RD parameters registry that somehow acquire an A flag in their lifetime?
If they did, that would be a change to that registry under whoever is change controller for that particular entry. And if we now, and basically it would be like just the same thing as doing a new registration, at which point the experts should check whether that's really okay. So adding the A flag would be just as introducing something new.
Okay, that's the avoiding collisions part. The other part, of course, is that the version without the A flag may be in wide use. And if that conflicts with something that is in the target attributes registry, then essentially you cannot add an A flag.
Yeah, exactly.
But you think that's okay?
I think that's okay. Yeah, because so the RD thing, there were two design considerations that went into that RD registry. One is that you can use particular entries even though their name would conflict with other users. For example, this is done in pagination. Pagination page numbers don't show up in results, period. So this won't create an issue. And the other design consideration was that even when they show up in attributes, it is known where they show up. So like a base won't just show up in results. It would just show up around a resource type equals core RD endpoint, and not just somewhere in a resource directory output when you're querying for resource lookup.
Okay. So that should lead us to a -03, which we then can ship to ISG.
Yeah, I confirm I'll be shepherd and I'll soon get into this.
Right.
Okay, any more questions or comments for Karstein on any of the topics so far? Okay, if none, we get the next document where there's, well, more comments and points to go through.
Yes.
right.
Let's see here. Okay, there we have the slides.
Ready? Yes.
Yeah, so hello everyone. So today I will be presenting some open points in this profiling ad hoc for CORE and OSCORE draft. And yeah, just to summarize the outcome of the working group last call, a number of reviews came in specifically from Christian and John, so thanks a lot for that. We discussed among the authors regarding how to address these comments and suggestions for updates in the text. And in fact, a lot of the non-controversial and editorial comments have already been updated in the editor's copy. And you can see that in the link there. But the goal for today is then to discuss the more then controversial topics we would need, where we would like input from the group, essentially. So we have 6 comments from Christian, 5 from John, and then we have an extra point we also want to raise. And let me go straight into this first comment from Christian. And this was regarding the payload of the ad hoc plus OSCORE request, which we currently define as a CBOR sequence of 2 CBOR data items. The first being ad hoc message 3, which is a CBOR bystring, followed by the OSCORE ciphertext, which in the current version is also intended to be a CBOR bystring. So yeah, a sequence of 2 CBOR data items, 2 CBOR bystrings. Now, the proposal from Christian was to change this payload format so it's no longer a CBOR byte string. Rather, we keep ad hoc message 3 as a CBOR bystring. However, the OSCORE ciphertext we do not wrap as a CBOR bystring. So you would basically have a CBOR bystring followed by just raw bytes. And the idea of this would be to save a number of bytes, actually 2 to 3 in most cases. And yeah, I see Karsten has raised his hand.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I could add that this is not a new format for doing things. So prepending a CBOR data item in front of some random data is, for instance, done in Appendix D of RFC 9277. So that we already have a word for that called a CBOR header, and this is essentially what we would be using here. And it's also quite fitting to what we're actually trying to do here.
Yeah, I think exactly right. I got that feedback from you separately. I think it's a very good point, and there is also already precedence for doing this sort of thing, and even a name associated with it. So that's very good. But essentially, I mean, our proposal from the authors is to, adopt this new payload format suggested by Christian, and update the draft accordingly. So any feedback or thoughts on that direction is very welcome. I see someone wrote in the chat there. Yeah, Malisha agrees, +1. Yeah, so then I think we will go for that direction and continue with the next comment. And yeah, feel free to jump in or even jump back if you think of something. But this is the second comment from Christian regarding error handling at the server. And the point here was that if the decrypted OSCORE request after decryption includes an ad hoc option, then we were saying to respond with an error if the OSCORE option is not also present. So essentially, we want to see the ad hoc and OSCORE option together. But Christian's point here was that this is all good and correct for this precise use case. However, it's not future-proof, considering also what is coming with regard to nested OSCORE and nested combined requests. So his point there was to avoid normative language to describe what cannot factually happen. And he proposed an alternative text, which is stated here, which would be when the decrypted request is checked for any critical options, as it is during regular core processing, the presence of an ad hoc option must be regarded as an unprocessed critical option unless it is processed by some further mechanism. So essentially, this is leaving the door open for this further mechanism, which Of course, can be other things coming up in the future, but specifically one thing that could be is the nested OS core. So again, here our proposal was to adopt this current alternative text suggested by Christian, because it seems good to leave that, to have some future proofing in mind already at this stage. Yeah, so again, any feedback or comments on this is very welcome. But we have a proposal in mind from the authors. Yeah, I move to the next point. So this third comment was really with regards to web linking. And just to recap, with web linking, you can use target attributes to describe an ad hoc resource, meaning specifically how can a server run ad hoc through that resource. And you see there on the right-hand side a list of the currently defined target attributes. So it can define the ad hoc method supported, the cipher suite supported, etc. But Christian pointed out something is missing here, which is to indicate support for the forward and reverse ad hoc message flows. And when we were discussing this among the authors, we also realized that we're also missing target attributes that indicate support for the initiator and the responder ad hoc roles. So based on these 2 points, our proposal is, well, then we simply define 4 additional target attributes. One for the forward message flow, one for the reverse message flow, one for initiator, and one for responder support. And yeah, these would not be repeatable, and they do not have any value. Their presence indicates the support of that relevant aspect. So, Christian.
Given that these web link target attributes are all on a resource that is, by having a URI and being a resource in the server role, what is the difference between indicating support for forward or reverse flow and indicating support for initiator or responder? I mean, if the resource that is advertising the being a serving as an ad hoc server thingy says it is usable with forward, then it has to be a responder, and if it says it's usable with reverse, then it has to be initiator.
Your point is like it would maybe be sufficient with the forward and reverse because they kind of imply or explicitly mean support for initiator and responder, since this is on the server side, this will be happening.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah. We take that as feedback for our internal discussion. But if we can save having both, I think that would be nice. Or save having all 4. Carsten?
Yeah, looking at this, I get the impression that we will have really, really long attribute sets. And I'm wondering whether we shouldn't develop a habit of actually having something like flag bits for things that come in groups, like the different roles and the EAD bits and so on. So you would use something EAD equals, and then you have a number where bit 1 means this and bit 2 means this, and so on. And so on. I'm just
I see what
wondering.
you're saying. We actually have a later point, I think, that is quite relevant on your current point. Yeah. Okay. So we come back to that. But on the idea of like not having this many target attributes, yeah, one way would be to have that bit encoding. We also have this idea of having like a, well, we'll come to that later, but a kind of a profile. So the profile would imply a set of these configuration options. Now, considering the profile, we were still wanting to keep the individual target attributes, but that could be reconsidered possibly if, like you say, it becomes an excessive amount. There's also yet another relevant point, which is we wanted to prefix these so it's clear they are specific to ad hoc. We wanted to prefix them with like ED, for instance. But yeah, you're saying basically to have like, we could have like one target attribute and a bit, a flag set of bits there to indicate the same. Yeah. But I see. Then we take that on board as feedback also. Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think we come already actually to this point. So this was yet another comment from Christian. So the idea here was, can't we have a target attribute that indicates the whole application profile? So you can combine an application profile, let's call it MySDO ad hoc P1, and to concretely define our proposal. Carsten, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm having a big problem with all these profiles that keep popping up. So at one point, HTTP was introducing a profile, or was it HTML? I don't remember. The web was trying to introduce a profile, and that simply didn't fly because to introduce a new profile, you need to be sure that all parties know what that profile is.
Yeah, let me clarify one point. Maybe I wasn't clear, but the ad hoc draft itself actually defines the concept of application profile. It comes from the ad hoc draft. They actually define this idea of it.
Okay, there was a document that defined this for the web, but that didn't mean that people knew what a specific profile value was going to mean. So nobody dared to put that somewhere, because there will always be some nodes, some implementations that don't know a new profile. So you will always have to indicate the same information in a pedestrian way as well. And that makes the profile useless.
I see. So yeah, I mean, our idea here was to have, like, I guess, like you're mentioning, we wanted to have a registry in the ad hoc draft to define, well, an application profile registry in the ad hoc draft, and then in this document a new target attribute to indicate. But your point is that, well, even if we have that registry, we cannot know that implementations actually support that profile, so we would have to also indicate using the individual target attributes.
Yeah, so if you can make sure that the piece of software that processes this profile is also the piece of software that is specific to this application profile, then it's not such a big problem. But if you actually have things like ad hoc libraries, or even proxies that do something with ad hoc, that simply may not know what's going on in that profile, you have this problem.
May I jump in here?
Yeah, please.
It might be good to notice here that this is all optimization. This is all avoiding one round trip, which I think may not even be worth doing all these attributes. But even if it is worth it, the profile here would just a producer can easily just indicate a profile value, because the worst thing that happens if the consumer doesn't know the profile value is that they can't expand it to this method csuit cred t, icred it, etc. Data, and will just try and then will use the regular ad hoc error mechanisms to discover what can be used, especially with substitutes.
Yeah, worst case is you lose the benefit of discovering through the target attributes. Yes.
Yeah, worst case is having one more round trip, which, given how large these things become, might easily become wood.
Yeah, so right, the functionality doesn't hinge on the fact that you understand this application profile. Rather, you can, in other cases, fall back to the error handling of ad hoc, basically. Yeah. But I see your point, Carsten, definitely, that it would require, basically, ad hoc libraries would need to understand this to take advantage of it, or you would have to have some functionality for the application to inform the library about the configuration of this profile. But then again, the downside, if you can't get this, if you can't use this, you fall back to the ad hoc built-in error and negotiation.
Yeah, and to clarify, if we take this direction at all, it has practically to start in ad hoc with defining this registry, and
Yes.
for this document is just about one more attribute to transport that name. So if this doesn't happen altogether with the registry, this is just not going to happen here either.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the final call is for the authors of the ad hoc draft if they wish to introduce this registry or not. if they don't, well, this will not happen in this document either. And just to finalize the slide, I mean, the idea was this is a repeatable value, so you could indicate multiple profiles for one resource. And you could still use a single future target attributes if you wish to append to this indicated profile. But I think I can take the next. I think we got a lot of good feedback on this one. Christian, you wanted to say something more?
No, I just forgot to mute again.
Okay. But then we come to the comment number 5 from Christian. So the point here was about a specific example we show in the draft. And in the current example of the web linking, we show 2 edhoc resources, one edhoc/res-A and the other edhoc/res-B. So the question here is, why do we do this? Or rather, the preferred solution would be to actually use well-known edhoc instead of these 2, let's say, custom different resources than well-known edhoc. And we think this is a good idea from the authors. In fact, this was actually the case until version 2 of the draft. And it changed after a interim meeting there in October of 2021. Because then we got some feedback. Basically the summary of that feedback was, well, if you use well-known edhoc, it means that the client knows how well-known edhoc works. So you wouldn't need to have these target attributes to indicate to the client how the resource works. But we thought about that a bit more. And I mean, well-known, it doesn't really mean that the edhoc client would know the application profile for this resource, well-known edhoc. Rather, it just means that the path and the fact that this is used for edhoc are well-known. So taking these points into account, we concluded that the easiest and also seemingly cleanest way to solve this is simply to revert back to use well-known edhoc as the example. And yeah, again, if anyone has any thoughts on that, feel free to jump in. Then I can move to the next. Yeah, one more about web linking. So here we come back to this idea of application profiles and having a, a registry for those. And the idea would be then, should we have a, let's call it a well-known edhoc application profile? And second point is, if that is the case, should it also mean that's the default profile for well-known edhoc? And to summarize the result of our discussions, on point 1 about having a well-known edhoc application profile, we as the authors feel that can in fact be a good idea, and that would be something then for the edhoc draft to define, and well, then also register in this possible new registry for application profiles. Because at least then there would be one registry profile available. However, on the point if this profile should be a default profile for well-known edhoc, we do not think so, for the reason that if we go that direction, it kind of becomes suggestions on what is mandatory to implement, which is already very little in edhoc, because the point is, like, if you have a default profile for well-known edhoc or for any other for any other edhoc resource, that means that clients wanting to interact with an edhoc has to support that application profile, and that can, in a sense, override the add stuff on top of what edhoc considers mandatory to implement. So, Christian, please.
I'm not sure. Maybe we're diverging here a bit on what this default profile would state. As I understand it, this default profile would just basically state the obvious things that were implied from using it over co-op. That is, we are all those details about that we are using the role identifiers just in one direction from the client to the server and not in the other one.
I see.
But it would not, that profile would not make anything mandatory to implement. As I understand those profiles, and I might easily be wrong here, they have a wide dynamic range of how narrow they can be. A profile can be like we're sending exactly those messages, and we're using that cipher suite, and we're using that arrow styles. But it can also be like we're using it. Our transport is co-op. We are using client IDs only in this and that direction, and we're using them later to derive an OSCORE context. And maybe not even that would go into the well-known ad hoc resource. I'm not sure.
I see what you're saying. Actually, we were also discussing. Yes, I agree. Our point of view is also that the profiles can be, let's say, wide in the sense of what they define. They can define very little, or they can define very much. I think our idea on this well-known profile would be that it defines sufficient amount to be quite specific, because if you only define what's in the like ad hoc compliance requirements, and I wonder, does it add very much value then? And you say you can define such things as where you have the connection identifiers, but isn't that already implied when you're using co-op?
So the value that I see in having such a default thing is not so much in nailing down those things that are already implicit, but it is to have something that is usable when your application is not interfering a lot with ad hoc. When you're using ad hoc just as a mean, like you're using TLS in HTTPS, you're doing quite regular co-op transfers, but you are doing them in with an extra layer of protection, and not participating in frankly, I don't even know what the other profiles would be.
Yeah, I think this is a good point, because I think what we had in mind on your suggestion would be that this profile would be quite fleshed out and not a minimal profile. And we felt that having a too minimal profile would mean that it doesn't really give any guidance at the end of the day. So you still have to do the kind of normal ad hoc, negotiation and trial and error and such. But
Yep. Yeah. But a profile doesn't need to rule that out, at least from what I've read in ad hoc.
No, I agree. The profile does not have to rule that out, indeed. Yeah. But I see, then maybe that's actually, we can take this and discuss further among the authors then on this idea of having the concept that, okay, this default or well-known, well, let's say the default profile could be a very minimal one, not defining, like you said, not adding something like mandatory to implement in ad hoc, right?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, and the details, since this would be something well known, again, this would be something to elaborate better also in the ad hoc document. That was the conclusion from a discussion with Joran also on this point. So in a sense, this document in core would just follow consistently on this if anything happens in ad hoc. Otherwise,
just
happens here.
Indeed, it comes back to this point about do the ad hoc authors want to define a well-known profile, and do they want them to create a register and register this profile? And so I think we got some good feedback on this one. I can move to the next point. Then we got a few comments from John Mattsson also, and the first was regarding the document title. So currently the title is Profiling ad hoc for Co-op and OSCORE. But John suggests, well, can we change this title essentially, because this document does not really profile ad hoc. And I think we can simplify the title. So after discussion with the authors, we came up with this proposal simply using ad hoc with co-op and OSCORE. There's a lot of profiles out there, or this word profile is used in a lot of contexts, so maybe it's better to avoid it in this context also. So that would be using ad hoc with co-op and OSCORE as a new title. And any thoughts? Or I see someone writing in the chat there. Yeah, Christian says +1 on the JPM1 resolution. Yeah, I think it's a good way forward. I move to the next point. This was regarding error handling on the server. So basically the point was that, well, if ad hoc fails during processing of the combined request, an ad hoc error message will be sent as a response to the combined request. And John wants us to clarify if this ad hoc error message can be protected with OSCORE. And there's also another related issue, issue 8 there in the repo. And after discussions with John and among the authors, we wanted to clarify that in such a way that the ad hoc error message is always sent unprotected. So John's point was there could be specific cases where you may be able to derive an OSCORE context, and even though ad hoc processing fails in some sense, like you are not fine to communicate with that other client or other reasons, but our conclusion was that it seems more straightforward just to always send this unprotected, and the text in section 3.3 would be elaborated, as you see in bold there, to add that the server must not establish a new OSCORE security context from the present ad hoc session with the client, and hence the COP response is not protected with OSCORE. So, yeah, Carsten?
Yeah, I'm wondering whether this decision doesn't create more disclosure than we actually want to have. I mean, this is really difficult to say. This is less a question about the protocol, but more a question about how people will be using this and what will be divulged in these error messages and so on. So I cannot answer this question. But I think if there is some serious disclosure likely to go on, then we might want to think about this some more.
Yeah, I mean, I would say normally, like the way ad hoc is defined as normal, the error messages would always be unprotected. So it's that's like the base case, and so this would be like what we could possibly do here is add on top of that or what ad hoc already provides. But they may also be difficult to determine in which cases should you actually go ahead and derive the context and which cases should you not. Yeah, Mark or Christian?
Christian, go ahead first.
Yeah, I think it's safe, given that other ad hoc scenarios do not protect. I think it's safer to make to put the responsibility always on the producer of the error message, not to do any undue disclosure, and thus keep the error handling easy and to not introduce bugs in rarely used code paths.
So that you're practically, by that you mean that you're fine with the suggestion to send it unprotected, or?
Fine with sending unprotected, and I think that Carsten's suggestion would possibly create dangerous situations. For example, not only implementation errors, but also people using ad hoc in this very scenario where the errors are protected, and then switching to another mode of ad hoc where suddenly the errors are not protected anymore, and then being surprised that there is disclosure.
I see what you're saying, right? To not come into a habit of putting sensitive information in the error messages, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to touch exactly on that detail, building on Carsten's comment. Maybe it helps to say that the unprotected error message should not give too many or sensitive details. And we did something along the same lines for group OSCORE at some point, where in case the failure was due to signature verification, I guess, the response was not exactly suggesting that. It was more generic, in fact. Would that help already?
But I think the best situation would, of course, be to essentially switch to opportunistic security as if some authentication that is required here doesn't work. I mean, if the whole protocol breaks down, then you have nothing you can base this on, and then your error message probably should be very frugal. But if you have an authentication error, for instance, then maybe it would be in the interest of the application to divulge a little bit more information. Yeah, but I haven't thought this through. I just wanted to bring up the issue of whether a security context that comes up but doesn't fulfill some requirements might still be useful to protect the error.
Christian?
That is a good point. Misclicked. Sorry. Okay, that is a good point, but then I think it would best go into ad hoc, because if there is a class of information that would best be protected, even by key material that doesn't imply any authorization, maybe that can go into an encrypted error message that ad hoc can send.
Yeah, it could also be something for ad hoc to have a more generic consideration on the possibility of encrypting error messages overall in ad hoc.
Yeah, I know that the position of John is that about this topic, something has to be said somewhere. It's just bad not to say anything. Last time we discussed with him in detail, it was actually about the open issue, which is about this topic.
Yeah.
And he was happy to say something along these proposed lines in this document. But of course, unless ad hoc in the first place says something different to just inherit, given the current state of the documents, this seems to be something John would be happy enough with in this core document at least.
Yeah, he just wanted to see, exactly. He wanted to see, basically, well, is it protected or not, right? To make a decision on how that should be handled. Yeah. Yeah, and then we took this path of keeping it unprotected.
Just one more note that I'd like to leave here, because it could be security critical in the other direction. If a response comes in, if a response is sent that is protected with the OSCORE material, it will have to be distinguished from a response to the original request that was sent, because otherwise someone could trick the state machine into, trick the server into not accepting those credentials and producing an error message that then gets interpreted as an application error, which it is actually not.
I'm not sure I 100% followed you. You're saying you have to be able to distinguish the response. If it can either be unprotected or it can be protected, but you have to be able to distinguish what precisely?
The client, if the client receives a message that is OSCORE protected with the security context derived from what came out of ad hoc, then it usually can trust that the ad hoc process got through, and that the protected message is the message that the server, in its authority of whatever identity it produced, provides to the request that was sent as an encrypted request. As soon as we start using deriving the OSCORE context and putting an ad hoc error message in there, that ad hoc error message might have the right content format attached to it, but it could still be ambiguous. So, for example, you're requesting the state of a PubSub topic, which, as far as I understand, can have an arbitrary content format. Whatever is sent there is kind of a representation of that PubSub channel.
Okay.
And when you then get the response, you don't know, was it my ad hoc that was broken, or is this literal thing with the content format ad hoc error the topic that I was just requesting?
I see what you're saying. How do you know if this is the resource representation actually or an ad hoc error message? Is there a way to disambiguate that? Yeah, that's a good feedback. We'd have to think about
content
that.
Format, probably.
Yeah, we have, for example, in PubSub Broker, we have resources that can really take any content format. So how do you know that there's no collision?
Right. Yeah, good
It's a good point. Yeah. Yes, that's one more piece of feedback, but that would be a complication, right? In the case we wish to have a protected error response. But yes, I think I can take the next point. But thanks a lot for the feedback. So this was about John was asking basically, is it clear what happens if the eddoc plus OSCORE request is retransmitted? And well, we discussed it amongst ourselves. And from our point of view, it should be clear because here we're really inheriting from what eddoc says, which is basically that different instances of the same message must not be processed in one session. So eddoc as designed is really forbidding any kind of incorrect handling or like reprocessing of the same message within the same eddoc session. So just inheriting from that and relying on that, it should be clear. And we were pointing to the error handling in section 543 and 62 of the eddoc draft, basically. So from my point of view, this is already clear today, inheriting from eddoc, and it shouldn't be a need to take any further action or like restate what is already said in eddoc. And I see Christian is saying +1 on this comment also, to defer to eddoc. Yes. But yeah, I think that's a good solution. I go to the next one. So this was more on web linking. So John was saying basically like you have this EAD1, EAD2, EAD3, and EAD4 target attribute, but you need to know what kind of EAD is actually supported, and that it should be using values from the eddoc external authorization data registry for these items. But indeed, this is already our intent, and we do refer to this registry. So the intent is really that these target attributes should use the integers registered in that registry and point to specific EADs that are supported. So, but what we want to do is clarify this more in the actual text. So you see the proposed change there in bold to add this few words about if present that the server supports specific external authorization date items to use. And then the second bullet there is we also want to add a concrete example. So it's clear that these target attributes are indeed pointing to specific EAD items, and not that they're not just there on their own, basically. So they actually list specific EAD labels for which the server supports that EAD item. So it's basically a clarification in the text. Yeah, I think I can go to the next one. That should be pretty straightforward. Yeah, so another point from John that came in quite recently, more on the web linking. So John's proposal here was that we have this CRED-T target attribute defined, which indicates the supported type of CRED for that particular resource. And well, Johns is suggesting to create a new registry under the FML development of a COSI registry group, either in this document or in the actual eddoc document itself. And you see there in the bottom right a proposal basically of what it could contain. And among the authors, we discussed also this point, and we said that yeah, this can indeed be a good idea. And but if it's created, well, let's create it then in the eddoc draft. And well, there's a proposal there on the values and the ranges and such. But fundamentally, yeah, this would be a new register for the CRED-T. Yes, Christian?
Is there much value in knowing that a CBOR web token is accepted without knowing which authorization server that would be accepted from? So what I think this would be the more valuable information here would not be the kind of thing that is accepted, but more the basically the authorities from which it is accepted, and those authorities will then issue a particular kind of set of credentials anyway. So, for example, if the authority from which data is accepted is an ACE authorization server, then what will be accepted is probably a CBOR web token. Whereas if the authority from which things are accepted is the public key infrastructure for like the browser PKI, then X509 certificates is what would be accepted.
Yeah, Mark, you wanted to jump in, or I think from our point of view, we don't consider the source of the credential, more the type simply.
Yeah, that seemed to be an orthogonal problem, and the CWT used as credential is not necessarily conveying also information about access control, although it could. But indicating the issuer of the CWT, yeah, that's a separate thing probably. Right?
Put differently, in order to make use of the information that would be presented here, doesn't the client need to know which issuer to go to anyway? And wouldn't that issuer only issue the right type of credentials anyway?
But maybe depends. I mean, if there are many possible issuers, but so you're saying like to link to attach this to like an AS somehow, for instance. But it could also be the client has already a set of credentials and it just needs to pick which one to use.
Yeah, the intention for these values here in EDOC in the first place, I think, was just to indicate the type of supported credentials or the supported types of credentials, and that's it. If you want to indicate a responsible AS or something with a link to it, it should work thinking of link format to add another link returned from well-known, for example, and tied by the relation attribute to the link to the EDOC resource, for example, with a proper value for the rel attribute, of course. But yeah, I think this is going beyond the suggestion of John and beyond the meaning of credential type.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just lacking a good example of how this would be used, but that example would certainly be beyond the scope of the OSCOR ad hoc draft, and more a matter of getting general agreement in this group of how this would be used, how this will all be used in practice.
I think it's a cheap way for the server to say, look, I support only C509 and CCS. I know it's a weird combination, but I support only those, so don't talk to me with other credentials than that, for your information.
Yeah, but I'm still stuck on why would a client be in that situation, but as I said, that's probably not for this draft and more for general insecurity discussion.
And looking at the slide now, I notice only now, is it worth having a range for private use? Basically anything not already captured by those ranges suggested there. Assuming one wants to play around with strange custom credential types for experimenting. Doesn't make sense at all.
It could be worth it.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt.
No, you could just add that range too.
Yeah, basically anything not falling already between those two extremes.
Yeah, but again, so this our proposal from the authors is that, well, the ideal place to create this registry would be in EDOC draft. So again, it comes down to, in such case, EDOC authors to take that action if they wish, and of course we can discuss with them.
If you notice, all the other target attributes that take a value with the exception of one, taking values from a COSI registry, take value from registers defined in the ad hoc document.
Yes.
So this makes sense to me that this registry goes, first of all, in the ad hoc draft,
Yeah,
rather than
agreed.
this one for consistency.
Indeed. Then it's yet another registry there, and this credit would take its value from there. But okay, yeah. We can continue with further discussion among the authors and also with the authors of the ad hoc draft. Yeah, we had one extra point also, which I briefly mentioned before. This was about prefixing the name of the target attributes. And well, now they would indeed become, well, even longer. However, it's clear that they are clustered for a specific purpose, which is ad hoc. So this is our proposal to do. Of course, now we can also, considering the feedback from Carsten on other approaches to the target attributes in the first place, we can take that into account too. But just based on what we had before the meeting, this was our suggestion to do this prefixing, just to cluster things in a clear and structured way. So ED would be the suggested prefix, and names would be as they were, except we were also then proposing to add 4 new target attributes, the flow directions and the initiator and responder, and well, actually a 5th one too then, which would be this ad hoc profile target attributes, but they would all be prefixed with ED.
So the conclusion before was that EDI and EDR are not really necessary, based on the discussion before with Christian, right?
You mean that? Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yes, indeed. Based on that
Yeah.
feedback, yeah, it's already implied by the flow direction and the fact that
Right.
this is on a server. So let's cut EDI and EDR. They seem redundant in that point. Yes.
To me, they look a bit better than F-flow and R-flow. So maybe they are the good choices. But either way, two of
we
those.
don't need both pairs, right? We can take either the F-flow ones or the INR ones, but it's sufficient to keep one pair. But maybe, yeah, the EDI and EDR are somewhat clean and very shorter. Yeah.
Exactly. But is it fine to you, Christian, if then they are phrased thinking of the roles, like the name suggests, instead of the flow that was your original proposal?
I'm fine with either.
Okay,
the important thing is that they're tied.
Then I think it's better to go for EDI and EDR.
I think that can make sense separately. Then we remove these F-flow and our F-flow would not be present anymore.
Right. ED-prof depends on what in the end is decided to do in ad hoc in the first place. And
yes,
if those things happen, yeah, it's very easy to add this.
Indeed, we follow and base our actions on what actually ends up happening in ad hoc. But yeah, let me go to the summary and the next steps. So, well, what do we want to do? Address all the working group last comments, and yeah, then submit the version 7 before the upcoming cutoff. And there was also a plan we had to submit a pull request to this target attributes draft regarding the renaming and addition of target attributes. Now that may be no longer relevant, depending on the recent updates Carsten presented. And yeah, that's it. So thanks a lot. Thank you for the very good discussion. Thanks for all the feedback.
Yeah, so I think that PR to target at will never happen because
it's not
target at is streamlined to
indeed.
already existing attributes. So that's okay. We already have text for the registrations anyway.
Yeah, it becomes irrelevant at this point, considering the updates from Carsten. Yes. Okay, yeah, if there are no further comments, I say thank you from my side.
Thanks, Richard. Which brings us to the AUB. Anything else you want to discuss about core today? heard none. Talk to you, Christian.
Maybe just a very brief pointer. I was tasked to review msync, full name in the chat, for art, and it looks to me like multicast notifications is also happening in HTTP, although they might not know it yet. So if you're interested in multicast notification and fanning out responses over multicast, maybe have a look at that. My review should be arriving in the art list about later today because that's the deadline.
HTTP is sort of considering multicast notifications.
A multicast synchronization protocol
to
transfer video objects over IP multicast.
Thanks, Christian. Will do.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no other points, we should talk again in 2 weeks. Have a good cutoff, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for the minutes, Christian. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.